August 7 to 18.
And the Senate actually went against Donald Trump.
$2,700 down to $525.
The senators staged a loud rebellion against Trump and Putin. They will strangle him with tariffs. As early as this week, they will impose hellish sanctions against Russia. The Senate will introduce 100% tariffs for anyone who buys Russian oil and other products.
Breaking news. Friends, sensational news. Senators Lindsey Graham and Richard Blumenthal have announced that next week they will impose hellish sanctions against the Russian Federation. Friends, please like this video, subscribe to my YouTube channel, leave a comment with your thoughts, and let's get started. The Senate is going against Donald Trump's policy. They are tired of his 2 or 3 weeks and his passive attitude toward the Russian Federation. Two senators, Lindsey Graham and Richard Blumenthal, are ready to announce hellish sanctions and secondary tariffs on the Russian Federation. The sanctions will be imposed by the Senate as early as this week. The Senate has declared a quiet rebellion against Trump and Putin. So the initiative is aimed at increasing pressure on the Kremlin, which, as noted, is preparing a new phase of the war while Congress is preparing countermeasures. The US response to Russia's actions will be clear. Tariffs for everyone who buys oil, gas, and other fossil fuels from Russia, including China and India, whose purchases account for 70% of the Russian Federation's sales, stated Senator Richard Blumenthal. The support from the EU has so strengthened the US in its determination to increase pressure on Putin. Arms supplies to Ukraine will continue and be intensified. We must give Ukraine more Patriot radars, artillery, and aircraft, not just rhetoric, stated Senator Richard Blumenthal. Democratic Senator Richard Blumenthal said that in addition to the sanctions package, the US must also continue its military support for Ukraine. We expect that next week the Senate will consider the sanctions bill, said Lindsey Graham. So over these next 2 weeks, I think it will become clear that Russia is playing a game at the expense of the whole world, not just the United States. We are going to change this game for Russia. The game that Putin is playing will soon change. The United States will hit him and hit him very hard when it comes to sanctions. China, the game you are playing with Russia will soon change. If you continue to buy cheap Russian oil and fuel for Putin's war machine, then all your goods coming into the United States will be subject to tariffs. The hellish sanctions that will be imposed by the Senate as early as next week, and an enraged Donald Trump, who is tired of Putin's games, and of course the Senate, which is tired of Trump's inaction. We will discuss all of this with the well-known Republican and Trump supporter Boris Pinkus right now.
Good afternoon, dear friends. Thank you. Glad to be on your channel, and glory to Ukraine.
Glory to the heroes. Boris Yakovlevich, well, we were all expecting action from Trump. Once again, he said 2 or 3 weeks. He's slowly turning into Arestovich. He's giving Putin 2 or 3 weeks to cease fire and agree to peace talks.
Can't answer the question yet. I'll tell you in a matter of weeks, maybe less.
So far, we see that Putin is shelling Ukraine. The summer offensive campaign is taking place on our territory. Putin has no plans to stop anything. What should we expect from the Republican Party? What should we expect from Trump? The floor is yours.
We have all witnessed, practically the whole world, and even Trump himself, that Putin is really leading Trump by the nose. He promises one thing and does another. Every day he attacks Ukraine, destroying civilians, infrastructure, and civilian facilities. I'm not even talking about the soldiers and so on. And all of this is happening on Ukrainian soil. And Trump's promises, whether to resolve things in 24 hours, in 30 days, or in 100 days, have led to nothing. And the persistent attempts to utilize this, I assume, deeply corrupt individual, Witkoff, who, was constantly shuttling back and forth with his diplomatic efforts between the powerful figures of Putin and Trump. Those concerted attempts also ultimately led absolutely nowhere. Just as everything Witkoff does in the Middle East is a complete failure as well. Nothing is working out with Iran there either. Donald Trump is increasingly coming to the profound conclusion that extensive negotiations will ultimately not lead to the desired and truly beneficial result. In other words, not even to a lasting peace, not even a temporary ceasefire is currently happening or appears to be on the horizon. Putin lies, makes promises, and continues to attack Ukraine. Now, look, of course, Ukraine's friends in Congress are not sitting idly by. You are well aware of Lindsey Graham's initiative, who has already drawn up, these draconian measures. These are sanctions against Russia. No less than a significant 81 people out of every 100 individuals have already formally signed on to this important initiative. And for these crucial sanctions to officially become established law, a clear two-thirds majority of the entire Senate is indeed quite sufficient, which is already much more than, say, a mere 69 or even 70 people demonstrating widespread support. No, it's already 81. Therefore, if Donald Trump, the former president, suddenly starts again to publicly say one thing and continues to overtly play along with Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, dragging this protracted conflict out and deliberately calling it a negotiation process, then the United States Congress will simply and decisively pass a new law. They'll pass a law and Trump will no longer have the right not to comply with that law. That's what we're counting on. And also counting on the fact that, Trump is giving 2 weeks. And so in 2 weeks or within those 2 weeks, something will happen, but it won't. Just yesterday, Putin announced his conditions, which have practically not changed at all since the first day of the war started by this barbarian. It's the same thing. Not only all 4 regions, including Crimea, but also the demand that Ukraine not be admitted to NATO. In addition to that, he also demands that Georgia and Moldova not be included in NATO either, which goes against the NATO Charter. NATO will never agree to that. This has already been rejected, and the West will continue to reject it. Furthermore, he demands, protection for the Russian-speaking population of Ukraine. This is that same old nonsense, that stupid, idiotic stuff. He just doesn't know what to latch onto. That's it. And, all of this strategic maneuvering is, of course, primarily aimed at making the Western nations, which to this very day persistently keep making significant and often unwarranted concessions to the Russian leader, Vladimir Putin, once again reluctantly give in to his demands and geopolitical pressures. But there's one interesting detail here. Until the last few days, before Trump started calling Putin crazy, Putin didn't want Trump to leave the negotiation process. Why? Because he sensed that Trump would make concessions. Trump hadn't even entered the White House yet, and he already said that Ukraine couldn't become a NATO member. That was a gross mistake on Trump's part. Even before the negotiations, he made concessions to Putin. Then he started to openly and publicly criticize, even to completely humiliate President Zelensky, the leader of Ukraine, in a very demeaning manner. And the date, February 28th, has gone down in history. It was disgusting to watch Trump quite literally mock with his yes man that Vance, mock the president of a country that has been at war for 3 years, sacrificing its remarkable generation. For our sake, for us Americans, because it is Ukraine today that is defending our values in the heart of Europe from this barbarian. Instead of responding to this appropriately in a fatherly way, I have the right to say this because of my age. Oh, Zelensky, he could be Trump's son. To understand him, to understand what he came with. And Zelensky was asking for it. I say this on every broadcast. Although he had every right to make demands because of that ill-fated Budapest memorandum. And even back then, Trump started shifting the blame from the guilty to the innocent, saying that you have no leverage, that you're the one initiating World War III. Putin skillfully uses all of this in his foreign policy. But I have always said and will repeat once more, let's not forget, Trump is the president of a democratic country. That means he is not all-powerful, no matter how much he wants to. He can't just do whatever he pleases. He simply won't be allowed to. The people won't let him. And let me remind you, to this day, 53% of Americans support unwavering aid to Ukraine. To this day, Putin is considered the #1 enemy of Americans. According to polls, only 2% consider Putin to be a normal person. 2% of those surveyed. Can you imagine? And even those 2% are probably the very same Russian KGB agents who have been sent here most likely. So just imagine, against this backdrop, Trump can't play the game, relying on his personal interests. So, people always ask me, what motivates Trump? Why does he behave this way? I believe, after all, it's material interest. It's about money. Just look at how he behaves toward one of the sponsors of terrorism. That's Qatar. The very same Qatar that you see wants to gift this very Boeing worth $400 million. That's a bribe, plain and simple. And it's immoral to say that you should take it. Why not, though? I'm not taking it for myself. It'll be with the Pentagon. I'll use it. And then when I retire, when I leave the White House, it'll be in my library. That's utter nonsense. It's the same thing. That is a bribe. And a president like Trump is absolutely forbidden even to mention this topic. And Putin senses this perfectly. He feels it very well. That's exactly how he's trying to buy off Trump and his circle, with promises of rare earth metals you see in Russia, and even offering the Arctic, not to mention oil and gas, for example, or uranium, and even Russia-owned energy infrastructure in Europe. There's Nord Stream 1, Nord Stream 2, and so on. All of this, of course, is the main, lever, the thing that holds sway over Trump, tempting him. Buying all that would be great to acquire it. Why not? That's the whole problem. But Congress, as I already told you, doesn't allow them to do that. First and foremost, the Republicans. Lindsey Graham is one of them. And of course, there's John Thune, the majority leader. In the Senate, that's a very significant figure. I'm not even talking about Ted Cruz or John Kennedy, for example, from Louisiana. Many other Republicans are categorically against making deals with Putin. And today, when Trump suddenly declared again, I'll give it 2 weeks, well, he already got his answer yesterday. He doesn't even need to wait 2 weeks. Yesterday, Putin already sent his response. Although Lavrov, during a phone conversation with Marco Rubio yesterday, took offense and said, we're working on the memorandum, we'll present it very soon. But this is just stalling for time, just like Iran is stalling with signing the nuclear deal agreement. In exactly the same way, it's all about dragging things out according to a single scenario, stalling for time, meanwhile attacking, destroying the civilian population, trying to break the spirit of the Ukrainian people, which is nonsense that will never be achieved. If you barbarians couldn't do it in 3 years, what can you possibly accomplish in another 2 weeks? Nothing. Unfortunately, it's only just now starting to dawn on Trump. So I return to the idea that until very recently, Putin wanted to keep Trump involved in this negotiation process. Why? Because Trump was making concessions to Putin. But now, when Trump has come under pressure from Congress and his own party, Putin wants Trump to drop out of the negotiation process. And right now, in his mind, he hears Trump's words. This isn't my war. It's Biden's war. It's Zelensky's war. It's Putin's war. So what do I have to do with it? Like, I can just walk away and you can sort it out yourselves. That's what he wants now. Putin has changed. Now, he no longer truly wants to keep Donald Trump directly involved in the ongoing process. And furthermore, Vladimir Putin thinks that once Trump completely backs out, his own hands will be entirely untied, specifically Putin's hands, and he'll easily deal with the entirety of Europe. He firmly believes that America will stay on the sidelines as a peaceful and passive observer. And Putin will easily break the back of the impotent West, which talks a lot but is incapable of anything. But he's mistaken. First of all, Trump won't be able to stay out of it. On the contrary, if he decisively withdraws from the ongoing process, he'll have absolutely no other choice but to openly and unequivocally support Ukraine, not just with economic sanctions, which we've already thoroughly discussed, but also with powerful and advanced weapons, truly formidable weapons that Ukraine has never before possessed. Those very same highly anticipated Attack MS will be supplied, and then hundreds of additional modern aircraft will swiftly follow. F-16s with long-range capabilities and many other things that the Ukrainian armed forces have never had before will be delivered. They definitely will. I'm absolutely certain that there will never, ever be any kind of deal, not in a million years. I've always said on our broadcast with you, there won't be one. You shouldn't count on it. It won't happen. The longer Trump delays providing aid to Ukraine, the higher the likelihood that not only will weapons flow into Ukraine like a river, but even American troops might appear there. And you'll see for yourself. Why? Because first of all of our history points to this, starting with the Korean War in the early 1950s. Truman promised, well, never. He said we would only help the South Koreans with weapons. But then he was forced to send in troops as well. We lost 37,000 soldiers from 1950 to 1953 while providing aid to South Korea. We have no regrets. We helped a country that today is one of the most developed in the world. We lost 60,000 soldiers over 8 years of war in Vietnam. 60,000. Can you imagine that? And how many did we lose in Afghanistan over 20 years of war? Afghanistan, Iraq, all of that combined. So that's precisely how it typically goes. First comes the substantial American weaponry, and then subsequently the actual soldiers arrive. But Ukraine doesn't need any soldiers at all. Not American, not British, not French, none. Just give us weapons. Ukraine can handle it on its own. The best example, a vivid and striking one. Just yesterday, a Ukrainian drone equipped with advanced fiber optic guidance technology, as you might be aware, was remarkably able to successfully attack a significant missile manufacturing factory located in Dubna. This particular facility is situated at a considerable distance, more than 100, indeed approximately 140 kilometers from, I believe, the bustling capital city of Moscow. And for the very first time, I'm specifically noting this significant event. It remarkably happened at such an exceptionally long distance, precisely 42 kilometers away from the actual front line. Can you imagine that? Ukraine was able to do this, and it can do even more. Ukraine simply approaches things in a humane way. It doesn't strike civilian targets, hospitals, or schools. But what are these barbarians doing in Ukraine? The exact opposite. So just give Ukraine what it needs. And Ukraine will handle it on its own. It will handle it brilliantly. It would have handled it long ago if that same Biden, the fool, the idiot, hadn't let things get to the state they're in today. Back then, it was possible when Russia was much weaker than it is now. Today, Russia has not only managed to develop its military-industrial complex, but has also become much closer with China, North Korea, and Iran. To our shame, we allowed this to happen. We contributed to it with our peacemaking, our appeasement. Do you understand? That's how it is with regard to Putin. And this has led to the fact that today, whether we want it or not, we will have to intervene in this war to stop this barbarian, to stop him and hit him hard so that this regime no longer exists. That's where everything is heading right now.
There are two very important points that I would like to discuss with you. The first is the 30 billion that Europe may allocate to Ukraine for the production of its own ballistic and cruise missiles. And the fact that Germany, represented by Merz, has already made a statement that it will finance the production of Ukraine's own weapons, ballistic and cruise missiles. What do you think? Will America join in on this? And is it possible, as President Zelensky said today, that Ukraine should strike Russia with at least 500 drones every day, and that we should have a stockpile of 1,000 drones? We should also have our own ballistic and cruise missiles. What do you think?
I have information that a lot of things that aren't made public actually come to Ukraine, specifically from America. These very drones that are being developed by Ukrainians themselves today, many of them also have, elements, components that come from America. That's the case. But the whole issue is about scaling this up, providing as much as possible. And this Merz initiative, it's amazing. Exactly. That's how it should be. Unfortunately, with a significant delay. This should have been started in the very first days of the war in Ukraine. That didn't happen. Well, so be it. Better late than never. And I have no doubt that Trump himself is under tremendous pressure from congressmen and senators who are insisting that Ukraine be supplied with what it is requesting within the framework of the existing programs. And I have no doubt that a draft version of financial aid for Ukraine is already prepared, specifically aimed at providing Ukraine with new types of weaponry. Moreover, the program that was adopted back in April 20th of last year, is already coming to an end. That program was about 61 billion. In reality, there was only 8 billion. Those crucial funds are already rapidly running out, and the United States Congress will simply have to urgently and decisively adopt a new comprehensive budget specifically and exclusively allocated for the ongoing support of Ukraine, ensuring its continued stability and defense. I think that's exactly what will happen very soon. Well, in any case, I've already heard that proposals, drafts, already exist, taking into account, the payment for modern types of weapons, those that Ukraine hasn't received yet. That's how it will be. That's how it will be. I think Trump will be forced to resort to this. He simply has no choice. He has absolutely no successes in foreign policy in any direction. Moreover, the prolonged war, the trade war with China, has a significant impact on the war in Ukraine. Trump's biggest mistake was that upon entering the White House, he shouldn't have focused on tariffs. By the way, I should also mention that as of today, federal courts have already decisively halted Donald Trump's controversial tariff war in a significant number of different areas across the country. So today, Trump, having already been struck down by several federal judges, will be forced to appeal even higher and will probably end up at the Supreme Court. And I don't think the Supreme Court will go against the lower courts. I really don't think so. In other words, yes, Trump is suffering defeat even in the area I started talking about, the tariff war, which has a significant impact on our economy and will soon have even more consequences. And that's not even mentioning his foreign policy. A complete failure in the Middle East because the Houthis, whom Trump supposedly, declared he had defeated, claiming the Houthis would no longer attack commercial ships, are still continuing to attack Israel. That's the most alarming part. So where is Trump's victory? I'm not even talking about the fact that Trump is starting to flirt with the Ayatollah. Moreover, today he is following the lead of the Arab countries. The most surprising thing is that Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates, who back in 2015 would have been happy if Israel had attacked Iran and its nuclear infrastructure, even back then, Bibi Netanyahu was fighting with Obama, who was supporting Iran with billions, by unfreezing those sanctioned funds. And yet, since then, if you look today, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the Arab Emirates, already during Trump's visit to the Middle East, they were strongly urging him, don't attack Iran's nuclear infrastructure. It's better to resolve things through peaceful negotiations, through diplomacy. The reason? They are genuinely afraid that Iran might indeed attack these particular countries. Let me emphatically remind you that in all three of these significant countries, America has its own substantial military bases. So, President Trump is now diligently following the urgent requests of these three concerned countries. But Israel, in this critical situation, truly has no viable choice, absolutely no choice. Iran must not possess any nuclear program whatsoever, at all, under any circumstances. Not a peaceful one, and certainly not a military one. It's out of the question. Israel knows what he's talking about. For now, Trump is pursuing this kind of appeasement policy toward Iran as well. The same attitude toward Putin. The longer he continues this so-called negotiation process with Putin, the longer Ukraine suffers. Poor, long-suffering Ukraine. And the real problem is that today these left liberals, the mass media, and these sycophants like Witkov and Schmidt are succeeding. They're managing to make the war in Ukraine as well as the war in Israel seem like a normal part of life for the people of these countries. That's the issue. Starikov and so on. It's already becoming, like this. I apologize. Ukraine. Yes, and what's happening today, what's going on in both Israel and Ukraine is just beyond comprehension. How can anyone calmly watch what's happening in these countries and talk about some kind of negotiations? This is exactly what bothers all of us taxpayers in America today. And of course, our representatives in Congress as well. The popularity of the Republican Party is declining precisely because, unfortunately, this trade war that was started is completely out of place. It was unnecessary today. On the contrary, the main priority of the Trump administration should have been the war in Ukraine and the war in the Middle East. Moreover, the approaches should have been completely different, not like the ones Trump is now trying to copy from the Democrats, who almost always avoided, using force to resolve issues. Today, Trump is far from the great Reagan, absolutely far. This manifesto, or rather Trump's philosophy, which he voiced in the early days of his second presidential term, a world based on strength, unfortunately does not appear to be such. Today, unfortunately, what we have is chaos based on powerlessness. But even now, Trump is speaking differently. A world based on trade. Just pay attention. In other words, he believes he can persuade, just like what happened between Pakistan and India. Oh, I stopped a nuclear war. I offered both countries a good deal. But with Putin, that doesn't work. Any deal that is offered to Vladimir Putin is simply an extension of Putinism, which encompasses fascism, banditry, and barbarism. It appears that Donald Trump is now just slowly beginning to understand this significant reality. And this critical boiling point, which former President Trump has consistently kept postponing, repeatedly calling it 2 weeks, will inevitably and certainly come. But the immense price we have already paid, and will undoubtedly have to pay for this, is simply and utterly terrible. And we Americans will also have to pay for it. Oh, absolutely. If Ukraine is paying with lives, then we'll have to pay as well. We can still earn money, but at the cost of shame, because we are becoming accomplices to the crimes of these barbarians, accomplices to the war in Ukraine. This is what he is starting to understand, and he is putting pressure on Trump. And I am optimistic. Why? Because sooner or later, Trump will come to the conclusion that Putin can only be stopped by force. There is no other way. And there should be no concessions to these barbarians, none at all. Putin's goal is obvious to everyone: to restore the Soviet Union, to take back all of Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia. There is no doubt about that. And of course, his influence over the South, in Eastern Europe, that's Poland, Hungary, Slovakia, the Czech Republic, Romania, Bulgaria, Poland, as I already mentioned, and of course, the Baltic states. That is Putin's dream. Even though many experts don't say it out loud. But that's how it really is. That's exactly how it is. And to our shame, our president, in whom we place great hopes, is waking up to reality very, very slowly. And unfortunately, this is costing us dearly. Boris Yakovlevich, President Zelensky said that the war could end in the summer of 2026, in June 2026, but he would not want Ukraine to be fighting until 2026. That's a quote from the president. In your opinion, when will the Senate be able to vote on these secondary sanctions against the Russian Federation, or will this really drag on until next summer, with Russia continuing its offensive actions and so on? That is, when I talk to many analysts, they say, Dasha, the war will still be going on throughout 2025 and 2026. Boris Yakovlevich. Well, I have no doubt that the sanctions will be adopted. I mean, by the Senate, and they will be adopted this summer. I have no doubt about that. They won't drag it out for long. Absolutely not. Why? Because Putin isn't stopping. He keeps attacking every day, every night. The whole world is witnessing what is happening in Ukraine. How can you just sit and watch? What are you waiting for? Trump may play these hide-and-seek games with Putin, but the Senate won't wait. It will simply pass the law. And then Trump will have no choice but to take action. Moreover, let me tell you, this morning Trump already has a headache because his popularity is dropping. The same goes for the Republican Party. We are all interested in winning the midterm elections next year. Their popularity is falling. So what kind of victories can we even talk about for next year? Absolutely none. In both chambers. That's why Trump simply has to demonstrate his leadership. But that's not happening, not at all. So Congress passes, the Senate passes, that is the sanctions law, and Trump starts to implement it. He won't have any other choice. And then maybe, that's when we might start to see some positive movement, positive shifts toward increasing Trump's popularity. Okay? And I think by that time, the situation with China will also become clearer. What should be done about China? I started to say that if Trump, in the first days of his presidency this term, had started with China, negotiating in good faith, trying to pull China away from Russia rather than the other way around. As people like that same Wensi Schmenzi and others are advising him, saying he should pull Russia away from China, China is the main enemy. That was a huge mistake. Unfortunately, Trump will come to this conclusion much too late because both the Chinese people and the Russian people who have lived their whole lives in poverty can go on living in hardship for centuries more. But we as Americans will undoubtedly start feeling the significant and widespread effects of this ongoing tariff war in the very near future, specifically within the next month or two, since virtually every third product available on our retail shelves is in fact of Chinese origin. And Chinese goods, the import of Chinese goods to America has already been cut in half. We, ordinary people, will literally start to feel the effects in a month and a half or two. That's when Americans will make it known that we do not agree with Trump's economic policy. This does not suit us. You see what I mean? And against this backdrop, this ongoing trade war with China has a significant impact, including on the war in Ukraine. Why is that? Because China is getting even closer to Russia. Moreover, there is already talk that China is now openly supplying certain types of dual-use goods, which the West was aware of, but now they are also openly sending some types of weapons. I'm not even talking about the fact that Chinese soldiers have already been spotted on Ukrainian territory, fighting alongside the Russian army, among other things. In other words, the situation is very serious, and Trump needs to urgently take, radical measures. On the one hand, in relation to Putin, and on the other hand, he needs to change, the tone of his actions. And against the backdrop of these draconian tariffs imposed on China, he should change his tone, change his rhetoric, and of course, sit down at the negotiating table so that China stops its support for Russia. Moreover, these threats from Putin and his entourage that they might use nuclear weapons, that supposedly Trump should remember that World War III could happen. This is voiced by the likes of Medvedev, for example. China does not accept this either. China has already said more than once that there can be no talk whatsoever about the use of nuclear weapons. So this could actually become, a great advantage for Trump's policy in terms of rapprochement with China. Start with that. And of course, as I've already discussed with you on our broadcasts, one of China's main demands is the recognition of the inviolability of state borders as recognized by the international community, which includes Ukraine's 1991 borders. That would be a good starting point in dialogue with China to convince China that Russia must be stopped and to develop our economy, at the proper level, taking into account mutual interests. Unfortunately, Trump is also losing out significantly, but he is under pressure. Still, I remain an optimist, truly an optimist. Why? Because returning to your question, first of all, the war will not end without America's involvement, without Trump's desire, without Trump's will. This is no peace talks, no agreements, all of that is utter nonsense, a waste of time. Only strength. Only strength can stop evil. There is no other way. And Putin only understands strength. Let me give you a small example. It's enough for Trump to say that he's furious, that Putin is crazy, and so on and so forth. And as soon as that happens, the level of rhetoric, the aggressive rhetoric from Putin and his circle immediately drops. Just pay attention to that. And now we're waiting for Trump. Well, come on, show your fist already. How is it supposed to be? Where is your power after all? That's how it should be. I think that so far, Zelensky is pursuing the right policy. That's how it should be. He's doing great by not angering Trump. He's removed the word no from his vocabulary. He does everything Trump asks of him. Even in this case, a couple of days ago, Trump suddenly started mentioning Zelensky again. Well, I really don't know what's going on with Trump. But in any case, today Zelensky isn't giving Trump any reason to accuse Ukraine. There's absolutely no reason. Ukraine is fulfilling all his wishes. Today, the whole issue is with Putin. And today, Trump is starting to realize that. So, to sum up, I want to say that our people see all of this thanks to the American media, who constantly show and report on what's happening in Ukraine. That's one thing. That's why 53% of Americans, as before, still support Ukraine. This is an important factor. And of course, the bipartisan Congress in both chambers, the lower and the upper, supports Ukraine. Trump, with nowhere to go, will be forced to show that he is, after all, the president of America. This is very important. So there's one thing I'd like to ask Ukrainians, our listeners. Don't fall for any rhetoric. Anti-American propaganda, which comes from Putin's Goebbels-style propaganda machine, has been going on and will continue for a long time. America will never abandon Ukraine. Why? Because the people will not allow Ukraine to be abandoned? Yes, it's very hard, very, very hard, and America has made many mistakes. Well, let's recall the famous phrase of the great Churchill. America always makes the right decisions, but only after it has tried everything else first. And apparently, in Trump's arsenal, there are still a couple of wrong decisions left. So after he steps on the same rake a couple more times and realizes that Putin is not someone you can negotiate with, that he is a real criminal, then probably he will make the right decision. And what is that decision? That is, I'm coming back to what we've already discussed, the supply of weapons to Ukraine, what Ukraine needs. Only that will stop the war. I think by the end of the year, we will see good positive results when Putin's regime will be falling apart at the seams.
Boris Yakovlevich, I am very grateful to you for your analysis. Thank you for your support. Dear audience, we regularly meet with the well-known Republican Boris Pinkus to discuss the situation in America and how it might affect the fate of Ukraine. Dear audience, please like this video and subscribe to my YouTube channel, Dasha Schastlivaya. And in the comments, let us know what you think about the situation overall. Let us know where you're watching from. Share your location in the comments. The well-known Republican and Trump supporter, Boris Pinkus. Boris Yakovlevich, thank you. And as always, see you again soon.
Thank you so much, dear friend. We will win and glory to Ukraine.
Glory to the heroes.